Hello and welcome back to another episode of Pragmatic Optimists on the Legal AF platform. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. We are back to discuss what the heck is going on across our country when it comes to ICE raids and detaining our precious and valuable neighbors. There have been so many troubling accounts, whether it is watching what is happening in Chicago. We also saw one of the largest raids happen in Atlanta. And then we got a new Supreme Court ruling that now rules that racial profiling is now completely legal in the United States. And while the memes can be entertaining in light of these horrific crimes committed amongst our neighbors and, again, precious fellow humans, I think one thing that I continue to want to center in this time is that these are all active choices. One of the quotes that has stuck with me is, "It is a republic if we can keep it." These attacks on our undocumented community members is a further erosion of our rights and a further attack on our democracy. This is an urgent call and an urgent reminder that all of us are responsible for defending our democracy and protecting our neighbors. Every single day that we allowed these attacks on our community members to proliferate our communities, whether it is in LA, Chicago, DC, Florida, Georgia, no matter where these attacks come, eventually we will create the conditions where this is the new normal. I don't want to exaggerate the current moment that we are in. Justice Sotomayor also recently wrote in her dissent that this is a wake-up call. One thing that was giving her hope is that there are people standing up and fighting back. But one of the ways that we can understand this current moment and your specific role in meeting this moment and pushing back against a future where our neighbors, our community members can be disappeared and detained indefinitely if they choose to come to this country to seek a better life, for more opportunity, to follow friends, and to create a future where every single person that they love and care about can thrive. That is what we risk losing if we continue to treat these situations business as usual. Rachel, I know you've been on the ground in Chicago, and I know you just recently wrote a Substack on what is going on and what we actually see in the headlines and how much more troubling the headlines are in reality. So could you please break down what this new Supreme Court ruling is stating and what the real risk and what the real dangers that are kind of behind the headlines?
Thanks so much, Tiara. There's three things that I really want to highlight in this moment. The first is the use of the Supreme Court shadow docket once again. The second is kind of talking through what that Supreme Court decision itself said. And then the third is a decision that came out of the Bureau of Immigration Appeals last week that I do not think is getting covered in the same way, and which makes sense, right? Bureau of Immigration Appeals versus Supreme Court, but I think is as or more important in understanding the reality and really horrific reality that the Trump administration is working towards. So just to make abundantly clear, the Supreme Court has been using this tool called the shadow docket over and over again, which is basically where over just the last really 10 years, a guy named Steve Vladeck has written a really good book called The Shadow Docket about this rapidly proliferating trend where instead of writing full opinions, the Supreme Court will just take up a stay or a preliminary injunction or a temporary restraining order, basically like a halt decision made by a lower court that can get appealed up to the Supreme Court. And instead of writing an opinion saying why they are getting rid of that stay or hold or injunction, they will just get rid of it. And so that's a really big issue, not just in terms of appropriate process and the fact that they make these decisions very quickly, but also because in our common law system, the reasoning of an opinion plays a very large role in how that opinion is implemented. So when there is no reasoning given, it is extremely challenging for lower courts to accurately interpret what's going on. And it gives people a lot of leeway to kind of do whatever they want, particularly when the Supreme Court is enabling conservative judges to do whatever they want. So shadow docket again, there's no full majority opinion. Brett Kavanaugh, the biggest loser on the face of the fucking planet, did write a concurring opinion, mostly to explain why, I'm actually not racist and this isn't actually all so bad. And it's so clear that Brett Kavanaugh just wants to continue to be invited to parties in DC. He has never cared about anything as much as whether or not other people like him. He was so angry during his confirmation hearings, not because of any degree of harm caused or false allegations, but because he was really, really worried that he wasn't going to be able to get seated at the restaurants that he likes the best in DC anymore. And on the off chance you ever see him in public, please just remember that the way to get Brett Kavanaugh to regret his actions, unfortunately, is not to point out that they are white supremacists, that they are killing people. It is to tell him that no one likes him. And no one likes you, Brett. And frankly, I hope you get booed the next time you go to the inn at Little Washington, you fucking loser. So Justice Sotomayor wrote a dissent that was joined. We've talked about the power of dissents very recently that was quite powerful. The opinion itself doesn't exist as stated. But what the case does is functionally say that historically under the Fourth Amendment, which governs reasonable searches and seizures and has been construed to include like police stops as a seizure, you need something called reasonable suspicion. And historically, race alone has been very clearly not reasonable suspicion. You may remember Joe Arpaio, the sheriff of Maricopa County out in Arizona, who was just pulling over Latino drivers and terrorizing them back in the 2010s. And the Supreme Court said that that was unacceptable. What they've said this time around is that it's different because out in LA, they determined that it wasn't just someone's ethnicity that was causing them to be stopped. It was also, according to Brett Kavanaugh, several other factors that cumulatively could be sufficient. And the other factors cited by Brett Kavanaugh himself, so this isn't like me misframing it, were where someone worked because they were targeting low-wage jobs, whether they spoke English or Spanish or English with an accent. And so basically, as Justice Sotomayor summarized, what you're saying is that poor Latino people can be racially profiled, or if someone, I mean, they're saying that location of work is a big thing, but it's very clear that the court would allow someone to be pulled over for not driving a very nice car and being Latino. And I think that this has not, because it has to do with federal agents, this has not explicitly legitimized practices like stop and frisk of Black people in the United States, but it has legitimized them. And it's very clear that the court, if it is asked to consider that question, if it bothers appealing it up, will decide that way because they are racist, they are illegitimate, and there has been a proliferation of abuse of non-white people by our prison system for as long as it has existed. And so...
Before we continue with that line of thought, we know that there is an anti-immigrant sentiment that is specific, but not entirely exclusive to people who are Latino and or Spanish speakers, because we've seen folks caught in immigration not just be Spanish speakers. We've seen them from a host of countries, whether it was Haitian migrants seeking safety, Cuban migrants. We also recently had the South Korean community with one of the largest raids. So while his explanation is targeting folks of who speak Spanish or English with an accent, what precedents do you see this setting for other marginalized groups? Because it's not specific. What can we see taken from this breakdown and be sent to other communities?
100%. And thank you for flagging that, because I think particularly the South Korean raid, or the raid on the Hyundai factory targeting specifically South Korean migrants, very, very notable. And I think that I recognize I'm not the exact right spokesperson to go deep into this thought process, but I do think that a lot of non-visibly Black and brown people of color sometimes think that the system is not going to come for them as well. And I think that a lot of white women, which I do feel very qualified to speak to, feel the same way. And I think that is fantasy land. That's not only unethical of selling out other people in the hopes that no one comes for you, but it is also just incorrect. And we've seen reports online of Indigenous people being detained by ICE because many Indigenous people may appear Hispanic to some extent, especially to like random ICE people brought in from out of town who are not engaging with the Indigenous community. And so 100%, it's a precedent that is set to kind of stop anyone. We've also seen the same thing where cisgender women who do not present as feminine enough for these losers are getting like genital checks before they can use the restroom. And that is not protective of cis women. And all of this to say, this comes and swallows us all. But I could go really far down that track. And I really want to talk about Matter of Hurtado, which is, Tiara, are you familiar with the Bureau of Immigration Appeals at all? I feel like most people who are not lawyers are not.
No, I am not. So please tell me why should I know about this? I did read your Substack, so I know that it exists, and I know that it's also setting some dangerous precedent.
It does exist in immigration court. Immigration plays out in civil courts as opposed to criminal courts. And that's really important in this moment because that's why Donald Trump is using it as an entry point, because there are fewer procedural protections in civil courts than in even our very broken criminal system. And so in civil court, if you are litigating your legal status in this country, you start in front of an administrative judge, an immigration judge. And if you want to appeal that up, it gets appealed up to an administrative bureau called the Bureau for Immigration Appeals. Bureau for Immigration Appeals then gets appealed up into our traditional court system. It gets appealed to the circuit courts, which then in turn get appealed to the Supreme Court. But the Bureau for Immigration Appeals can issue binding decisions that are binding on immigration judges. And then if one circuit overrules those, but others do not, there can be a circuit split, and immigration law can vary really widely from place to place, which is also very troubling. But all of that to say, the Bureau for Immigration Appeals issued a decision this past Friday that did not get the same attention. It's called Matter of Hurtado, that basically requires that while people litigate their immigration status, so we have this racial profiling case at the Supreme Court that allows people to be like snatched off the streets. And then while they are litigating whether or not they are legally in the United States, the Bureau of Immigration Appeals issued this ruling on Friday that says that they must be held in detention the entire time that they are litigating that, which is a massive, I cannot overstate what a substantial change this is. And the last thing that I will put a fine point on before I turn it back to you, because I recognize we're running a little long, this is just complicated, is that 90%, 99.0% of migrants in detention are held in private prisons. And private prisons donate extensively. Two major private prison companies hold almost all of those people, GEO Group and Core Civic. And they donate extensively to Republicans. So those are the horrors. That's the kind of statutory frame. And I know that now it makes sense to maybe highlight quickly a couple of the real harms that have come out of these immigration raids over the past couple of weeks. And then maybe you can leave us with a little bit of optimism. We'll see.
We will see. So, Rachel, we now have set a new precedent. Private companies who make billions of dollars detaining people, specifically who also got these large contracts because they donated to the tune of $500 million in the last election cycle to get these contracts. So billions of dollars are being made to detain our neighbors in a new precedent set by the BIA, which you just mentioned, when we now also have a new precedent that says that anyone who looks Hispanic, looks like they speak Spanish or English with an accent, or has a low wage job can now be detained indefinitely. We are sweeping up American citizens and tons of folks who have legal status to be in our country. While these are troubling things, I was watching an interview that Justice Sotomayor did, and her hope was exactly what we talked about earlier. Knowing the history and context, I think it is also not lost on me that there is going to be a new mandatory detention center that is going to be set up at Fort Bliss, which is a former World War II site for Japanese internment. We are recreating history in this current moment, and I urge people to, if you are not someone who is going to be comfortable on the front lines, please read and learn about what our country has been through. Who are those people? I know people who are former Japanese internment survivors. George Takei, it talks about his experience, also has a children's book and other literature that he's created to highlight his experience and to share the stories of American citizens who were interned during a period of fear in our country. And we're seeing that same reality now sweep up people who look like us. And we have seen so many calls for whether it is the Never Again movement, whether it is people who are saying history is doomed to repeat itself if we do not know where we have come from and where we are going. But one thing that keeps me hopeful is that there are people that are continuing to fight back. We still see massive protests that are happening around the country. We still see organizations like 5051 and Indivisible hosting large movements. I believe there's another action that's happening on October 19th that they are mobilizing people for all across the country. And that is what gives me hope. Not everyone is going to be suited for the front line. Some people are going to be the caregivers. Some people are going to be the guides. Some people are going to be the people who set up the mutual aid. But that's what keeps me hopeful. It's not about everyone every single day giving every single thing that they have, because these are going to be long fights. We continue to see time and time again that history is going to try to rear its ugly, indefensible atrocities into our current moment. But it is up to us to know where we've been and know where we are going, because our communities are too precious. Our democracy is too precious, and it's a republic if we decide to keep it. So that is a little bit of optimism I'm going to share for today. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. We are going to continue to fuel the movement forward, and we hope that you join us along the way. Thanks, Praggies.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.